Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018-09-07. Story 1, My Wife and I Die Daily. I'm lying in bed next to someone who I'll call my wife, but tomorrow, I know there will be someone different waking up next to me. My current wife will be dead by tomorrow afternoon and I will end the evening dying in a fiery car crash. I know this to be true because it has happened to me 112 days in a row. The markings on the bed frame prove it. The best way to describe the first 25 years of my life is a mixed bag. I would like to say I lived a normal and uneventful life, but there were always bizarre accidents that seemed to change the course of my life. Events that, reflecting on now, were precursors to me being trapped where I am today. It feels surreal writing this, but I have no idea on where else I can turn. I will start from the beginning. I have plenty of time. My wife won't wake up for another, at the point of writing this, 2 hours, and I have an unlimited amount of days to continue my story. If you're a fan of the movie Groundhog Day or the film franchise Final Destination, my story is similar to both of those. My wife, Cassie, and I died 112 days ago on vacation. We had been together since freshman year of college, but I met her when I was 6. We grew up together and didn't really spend any time apart until high school. In high school, we both started dating other people and not each other because we didn't want to mess up our friendship. I was dating a girl named Katie. A tall brunette with deep chocolate eyes and a single dimple in her right cheek that was absolutely perfect. She was a very sweet girl and we got along super well and had a lot of common interests. Cassie was dating a jerk named Mark that was super abusive. Mark and I were always getting into heated arguments. I had finally convinced Cassie to dump Mark, but she thought that meant I was going to break up with Katie. I really liked Katie and had no intention of breaking up with her. Therefore, Cassie and I had a short falling out between the start of junior year and halfway point of my senior year. During my senior year, Katie and I were still doing very well together. We hadn't even ever had a fight. We were going to start attending university together after graduation, but tragedy struck Katie and her family. Katie's father was killed in a car accident. Katie's father was driving back from his medical practice. He was a psychiatrist, and he was forced off of the road by an old-school red Ford truck. The police said he hit a tree head and died instantly. The driver ended up being Mark, Cassie's ex. He was drunk driving at the ripe age of 18. He lost his license and was sent to prison. Katie wasn't the same after, and I don't blame her. She and I split up halfway through our senior year and decided to attend different colleges. I slowly became closer to Cassie again, and the night of graduation I found Cassie and asked her if she wanted to try dating. She said yes and was excited beyond belief. We dated all through college and got engaged and married after graduation. We have been married 4 years now and things had been going great until our accident. Every summer we went out west. This time we were staying at a small bed and breakfast in the mountains. We decided to just take a long drive around the mountain in the early afternoon when the incident happened. There was a bend in the road and we were driving on the outer half of it. There was a blind spot around the bend. We were about to make the turn when, seemingly out of nowhere, a red Ford truck appeared in the center of the road, forcing us against the guardrail. We hit the guardrail and scraped the side of it, avoiding the truck. Sparks shot up off the car and screeches of metal against metal shook the car. The guardrail gave way. It all happened so fast. We went over the edge of the mountainside and down the hill into a forested ravine. The car flipped end over end and we hit a tree head-on. I looked over at Cassie and immediately knew she was dead. She had a tree branch through her trachea. I sobbed and screamed trying to get to her, but my legs were pinned and the front of the car was caved in. I smelled gas and there was smoke coming from the destroyed engine. I grabbed a shard of glass from the windshield and started to saw at my pant legs, trying to escape the wreckage. My pant legs ripped and blood started to soak into my jeans as I tried to tear the fabric away, hoping that it would help me free my legs. Despite my best efforts, I was trapped. I resigned myself to our fate as I looked over at my wife one last time. However, I didn't see her face. Where her face should be was a blurred image like the kind you see on TV as a kid when they didn't want to show inappropriate content. I thought I was going crazy and started clawing at my eyes, rubbing them, in order to see Cassie one last time. The car caught fire and I sat there screaming for help. I was instantly consumed by the flames. I then woke up in the room at the bed and breakfast Cassie and I were staying at. I prayed this was all a bad dream. I rolled over to see if Cassie was next to me. She wasn't. There was a woman I had never seen before in bed next to me. This woman had short blonde hair and was laying perfectly still and flat like you see in a mattress commercial. Despite being in a bed with a random stranger, that had to be the creepiest part. It was like she was a doll. I jumped out of bed and ran out of the room. I went to call Cassie but I couldn't find her number in my phone. Odd, but I had been having issues with my contacts in my phone lately because it was a work phone that constantly forced updates. I tried to dial her number by memory and heard the inactive number message. I tried a couple more times in case I punched in the number wrong. No luck. I opened Facebook hoping to message her. I noticed my profile picture was different than it was before. I enlarged it and saw myself at my wedding getting married to a woman I had never seen before. It was the woman that is sleeping in my bed. I thought this was some sick joke but when I tried to think of Cassie my mind kept going blank. I checked all of my social media accounts and I was married to this woman in all of them. I couldn't find a single piece of evidence that Cassie ever existed. I opened my wallet hoping to find a photo of me with Cassie but again it was a photo of me and this strange woman. I put my back against the wall outside the room and slid down until my butt hit the floor. I put my head in my hands and cried. I had every memory of my entire life left, including all of the ones with Cassie, but I couldn't remember what she looked like. My head felt like it was filled with cement any time I tried to think of what she looked like. The room door opened, room 502, and out walked the mysterious woman. She asked if I wanted to go for a drive. Super flustered I asked what was happening and she just smiled and motioned for me to follow. She led me down to the car which I thought I had totaled and she jumped in the passenger seat. The entire drive and accident repeated itself. We were making a bend when around the corner a red Ford truck was driving in the center of the road forcing us against the guardrail. We hit the guardrail and scraped the side of it avoiding the truck and the guardrail gave way. We went over the edge of the mountainside and down the hill into a forested ravine. The car flipped end over end and we hit a tree head-on. I waited for the car to catch fire. It eventually did and I again was consumed by the flames. I then woke up in my room at the bed and breakfast. I looked to my right and there was another strange woman there. This woman had long reddish-brown hair that was extremely curly. I got out of bed and sat in the chair that was in the corner of the room. I checked all of my social media. All of my photos were the same as yesterday but with one glaring difference. The blonde-haired woman from yesterday was replaced by the redhead from today. I shivered. The dates were advancing but my day had repeated itself twice already and I still didn't know what happened to Cassie. My day then repeats itself again. I went for a drive with the stranger and I died once again in a fire. I then woke up to another strange woman in my bed. I marked the bed from with my car keys the day before and the mark was still there. I decided to add 2 more tallies. I have added 109 tallies since then. The day never changes. It is always a red Ford truck. Each day is exactly the same. I wake up, check social media, see a different woman with me in my profile picture. The new woman enters the room, and then we get in a car accident. I know it might sound crazy but I have such vivid memories of every single day. I can remember what each woman looked like except my actual wife, Cassie. The days are still advancing as Cassie and I were on this vacation in May. I have started talking to the strange woman and each one is unique in their own way. There are no similarities between them and Cassie. However, every single woman had one thing in common. No matter how many times I've asked the question, I always get the same response. The women always smile and show a perfect dimple in the right cheek. They then replied. Katie. Story 2, I've had the same dream for 26 years. The things that haunt a man the most, are not usually the choices that he's made, but rather the choices that he never did make. I've lived through some of the worst hells that you could ever imagine. 9,490 of them to be exact. Every night when I lay down to sleep, I find myself praying for the same thing, sleep, with the absence of dreams. Every night is exactly the same. This trend started 26 years ago when I was 10. The first time that the nightmare overtook my dreams, I had come home from the worst day of my life. My dad had taken me to a splash park. It wasn't much, just a couple water jets that shot up into the air, that kids could run around under and cool off from the heat. We were poor growing up and never could afford to go to any big water parks, but the splash pad was still always fun. That is until that day. I remember running around under the jets, carefree, enjoying the sweet relief that the cool water brought as it splashed on my red skin. There were a couple of other kids there too, but I didn't pay them much attention as I was always a bit of a loner even as a child. "Kyle, come on buddy, it's time to go," I heard my dad say from the bench that sat opposite of the pad. Or "Come on dad, just a little longer," I pleaded, not noticing the little girl that was making her way toward me from the other side of the pad. "5 more minutes," he replied, shaking his head and smiling. As I turned back toward the water jet, happy for the extra time to play, I was met with a little girl standing, not even a foot away from me. My heart seemed like it would jump out of my chest as I noticed the girl's face. It looked decayed, her eyes were sunken back into her skull, they were pure white, and her mouth was wide open. She stood there gazing at me inches away, mouth hanging open, for what seemed like hours. I couldn't move, I was frozen at the sight of this hideous girl. After a while of this, I finally regained my ability to speak and said, in a shaky voice, "Hi, I'm Kyle, what's your name?" The girl turned her head to the side, like a dog does when he's trying to understand what you're saying to him. "Wah-ah-ah-ah." She let out a long gasp in response. Her breath hit my face, it smelled like smoke and burned hair. It wasn't until I stopped choking that I realized she had burns all over her arms and legs. Long singe marks going up the sides, from foot to waist. The skin was hanging off from several places. I turned in fear back toward my dad, hoping that he would see the girl and come rescue me, but he was chatting with another kid's mom on the bench, not even looking in my direction. As I turned back to face the little girl, she was gone. I ran hard and fast to where my dad was sitting. "Hey buddy, you finally ready to go?" he said, smiling, but his facial expression quickly changed as I got close to him. "What's wrong? What happened?" he asked, concern now mixed into his tone. "The girl over by the pad," I replied through heavy breaths. "She's hurt, or burned, or I don't know." Looking over my shoulder to the pad, my dad asked, "What girl?" "I don't see any girl, Kyle. Let's go home. I think you've just had too much sun today." I didn't argue, maybe I had just imagined it. We walked back to the car. Dad was talking to me, but I didn't hear anything he was saying. I was too preoccupied looking over my shoulder back toward the pad, searching for the little girl. My dad had to basically push me back to keep me from walking straight into the car door as he held it open for me. "Whoa champ, watch where you're going. I can't afford a hospital visit if you bust your noggin open on this door. We will come back to play another day, I promise." The car ride home seemed much longer than usual. My mind was still thinking about the little girl. Where had she come from? Surely her parents would be looking for her to get her wounds patched up. As my dad and I pulled into the driveway, I could see my mom coming out to greet us. "He's a little shook up. Too much sun, I think. Better get him inside and cool him off," I could hear my dad tell her after their usual welcome home kiss and hug. After we ate dinner, Mom came up to my room as I was getting ready for bed. She closed the door, which was really strange since she normally just came in, picked up my dirty clothes and gave me a hug and kiss goodnight. There was something strange about her facial expression, something different about her tone of voice as she said, "Your dad told me about the splash pad. What did you see?" A little reluctantly I recounted the events that happened at the splash pad, not leaving out any detail. Mom just sat on my bed listening, her new expression never changed as I concluded the story. There is something you need to know, Kyle, but this stays between you and me. I don't want your father knowing about this, she said while I looked nervously at her. My parents were always the perfect couple, even through hard times they always loved each other. They never fought or had harsh words between them, so the thought of her keeping anything from Dad seemed odd to me, and I didn't really like the idea of it. We come from a long line of mediums. She stopped as if trying to really think of the right way to explain. What you saw was an omen. It wasn't as bad as I expected though, since the girl didn't touch you, and she disappeared. You need to be aware of a few things. Her eyes starting to water as she continued. These kind of omens never mean good things to come. In this case I believe that the little girl must have just been killed in a fire, and she came to you because you are like a magnet to the spirits that still walk the earth. I didn't know what to say. I had no idea what she was talking about. I thought that ghosts were just make-believe, and now suddenly she's telling me that I attract them? Finally, after staring at her for what seemed like an hour in disbelief, I said, "Are you a medium?" She laughed, confusing me for a second before she replied with a big smile. "Oh heavens no baby, I'm not a medium. Did you think that I could keep that fact a secret from your father for all of these years? No, your grandmother, my mom, was a medium. So what does this mean for me? I managed. It means that things are going to start happening around you. Lights flickering, shadows in your room moving at night, waking up to voices talking to you, premonitions, and dreams." There it was, dreams, the very thing that would plague me every night for the next 26 years. I never did see any ghosts or any other weird things that my mom spoke of after the girl at the splash pad. After our talk, Mom left my room, leaving me scared and confused about all of the new information that she had just offloaded onto me. I laid down and turned out my lamp. I lay awake for a long time, spooked, rapidly looking around my room searching for anything out of the ordinary when sleep finally took me. The first thing I saw was a building on fire. It was a large 2-story house at the end of a cul-de-sac. The mailbox read 322 James St. There were fire trucks with ladders and firefighters pointing hoses toward the inferno, trying to extinguish the fire. I became a little disoriented from all of the lights flickering from the trucks and ambulances jam-packed in the cul-de-sac. It was dark outside, and besides the fire that engulfed the house, the only lights were from the emergency vehicles. I stumbled a little, and as I looked down toward the ground to regain my bearings, I realized that I was wearing firefighting equipment. I reached my hand up and felt the helmet on my head. I could hear someone shouting something from behind me. I turned back around to see who it was, nearly hitting another firefighter with the axe that I had in my hand. I hadn't even realized I was carrying it until that moment. A man standing by a red SUV that said "Fire Chief" on the side was looking right at me. "Kyle, go!" he shouted, pointing at the blazing house. I didn't know what I was doing, but at the same time it felt like I had done this before 100 times. I turned back toward the house, running at full speed toward the flames. Even with my protective gear on, I could feel the extreme heat radiating from the blaze. I could hear someone's voice come over the radio. Parents say there is a little girl trapped in the second-story bathroom. Without hesitation I responded, 10-4, I'm making entry now, keep on my 6 and stay sharp, watch for falling debris. This kid is not dying on my watch. Myself and 2 other firefighters made our way into the house. The black smoke that billowed in front of me almost blacked out the hallway we were traveling down. I could hardly see 10 feet in front of me. We pushed forward with the hose slung over our shoulders. "There's the stairs," I yelled, pointing to my right as we continued down the hallway. The stairs were not yet on fire, besides a few burning embers that had fallen onto them from the top floor. I made my way up, tapping on each step with my halogen bar to make sure that they were stable. The climb was slow and the hose we were pulling was heavy. Once we got to the top landing, I could see flames engulfing the sides of the walls and roof going down the second-story hallway. The heat was almost too much to bear. We made our way to the first door on the right, touching it to feel for heat. If there was fire on the other side of the door and we opened it, it could cause an explosion, killing us all. After determining that there was no fire on the other side, I began to scream, "Holly! Holly, are you here?" No answer. I don't know how I knew what name to call, it just came to me. I tried the knob, it was locked. "If you're in here, stand away from the door, I'm going to break it down," I yelled before swinging my axe toward the door. It took 3 swings before it opened. As I stepped into the bathroom, I heard a loud crash from behind me, it shook the house. Looking back, I could see that part of the roof had caved in, blocking the hallway to the stairs. Frantically, I searched for the girl. She was sitting in the tub, unconscious. Another crash, this time causing an explosion in the hallway, blowing out the window at the end. I could hear the glass shatter, feel the pressure from the blast. "Get the girl, we have to get out of here," I could hear someone say in my radio. I reached down, picking her up and cradling her against my chest. As I turned back to leave, the other 2 firefighters were using the hose to put out the fire from the fallen beam, so that we had a safe path to leave from. Slowly, testing every step, we made our way back down the hallway, the flames getting more violent, the heat seemed to have tripled. Just as I made it to the stairs, one of the other firefighters pushed past, almost knocking me off of my feet as he ran by, flying down the stairs in fear. "Fuck!" I cursed as I slammed into the wall, flinging the legs of the little girl into the fire. I could hear her skin sizzle in the flames. As I began to regain my balance, I saw why the other man had fled. The main beam in the roof was falling right toward me. With a loud crash, it pinned me to the ground, causing me to drop the little girl. She was still unconscious, lying directly in the flames to my right. My head spinning, I tried to push the beam off of me, but it was no use, it was too heavy. After a few minutes of pushing, I gave up, feeling the flames starting to burn my own skin. The fire was beyond control. I was stuck with no hope. My heart was pounding with the thought of the little girl burning to death as well as my own fiery doom. I lay there in agony, feeling the flames licking the skin on my hands, and in one instant I watched as the rest of the burning roof collapsed on top of me. I awoke drenched in sweat, screaming. My mother rushed into my room, fear on her face. After calming down, I recounted the dream. Her hands covering her mouth and tears streaming down her face as I spoke. She didn't say anything, just sat there holding me. It's been 26 years to the day, since that first dream, and every night has been the same since. The same house, same girl, same death. As I am sitting here writing this, I can hear the alarm sounding, and a voice just came over the intercom. Now I have a hard choice to make. 10 to 70 structure fire, all units respond. 322 James Street. Story 3, warning, we are all living in someone else's dream, and we need to find the protagonist. I know what this will sound like. Crazy. Deluded. So incredibly stupid that I'm probably just some weird conspiracy theorist who's trying to make everyone paranoid. I wouldn't blame you if you think this way, but don't say I didn't warn you if the protagonist comes to your town. Dreams. They've been an everlasting mystery in the world ever since the dawn of civilization. Ancient people began the popular notion that dreams can tell the future. The phrase déjà vu builds on this belief. One scientific theory states that dreams are an evolutionary trait. They help us prepare for future events by simulating them in our minds. Most people, however, don't put too much meaning to their dreams at all, since it's pretty hard to remember them in the first place. Of course, I myself hadn't thought too hard about dreams my whole life, in fact, up until last week. But that all changed with the arrival of the protagonist. It started with the power outage. I'd been driving home from work on the highway, and I'd finally been released from some built-up traffic a few miles back. Cruising down the road, I'd fully expected to see my exit illuminated by the bright lights of the apartments behind it, but I was met with nothing but dark silhouettes of the buildings in my town. Once I arrived at my apartment, I'd found out from my neighbors that the power in the entire town had suddenly gone out in the middle of the day, with absolutely no explanation why. More surprisingly, nobody had come to fix anything. and no messages from any public services had been sent to us. It was as if we'd all been abandoned, doomed to spend the night in complete darkness. Fortunately, the rest of that night wasn't so bad. I didn't know what was coming, and I was sure that things would get better. I'd found some battery-operated lanterns, and got through the night okay. The next day, however, was when things really started to go wrong. I woke up to fire truck sirens. Stupidly, I guessed that they were here to do something about the power outage, until I looked out the window. Dozens of fire trucks zoomed past my apartment in less than a minute, racing through the streets one after another. Once they had all gone by, I was bewildered, stuck in front of my window just staring outside in a daze. Unfortunately, it all got worse from there. It was a Saturday, so I didn't have work that day, but I did get busy with some of the more dedicated members of my town who wanted to figure out a way to fix the power. However, that's when I learned the extent of what had happened during the morning. No calls had been going through. For some crazy reason, every single one of our cars refused to start. And still, no help had come from any authority, leaving only one possibility: somehow, our town was meant to be isolated. At this point, most of us assumed that we were going insane. People were out on the streets, simply crying their eyes out because they didn't know what else to do. I, myself, tried to reason my way through this. There had to be some logical explanation for all this: the power outage, the fire trucks, the calls, the cars. I, along with some other town members, decided that we needed to find out if this was just happening to our town, or anywhere else. So I, my neighbor Kyle, and some guy on the town board named Pierce volunteered to walk to the highway. I don't know what might have happened had Kyle and Pierce and I gone on that mission. But it looks like the protagonist refused to give us that chance, because that was when all hell broke loose. I had gone back to my apartment to get the supplies I had promised to get for the group when the screams started. Sprinting to my window, I stayed glued to the panes as I saw a scene that made my stomach lurch and my brain go mad. People in the streets were floating up into the sky. The lightning started then. Not random, normal bolts, but lightning that came on a regular basis, each one targeting a different person, screaming and thrashing in midair. The lightning soon came faster and faster, until a burning odor reached me and I fell back from my window, retching and gagging from what I had seen. And suddenly, just like that, the screams stopped. I slowly got to my feet, scared of what I might see outside but not able to resist the power of dreading curiosity. Nobody was out on the street anymore. Nobody except one person. From my apartment, he looked like a kid, almost, strolling down the street. He seemed to be taking his time getting around, taking good, long looks at everything in the area. I almost dashed outside to warn him that it wasn't safe, that the lightning might come again, that the town, as I had once known it, was ruined. But I realized that something was off as soon as he stared directly up at my apartment window and laughed. My apartment was on the 5th floor, but for some reason, I instantly knew that he had seen me. Quickly, I stumbled away from the window, trying to get somewhere safe, when I felt the ground lurch beneath me. I felt like I was in an airplane descending towards the runway, but 10 times faster than usual. As my things began flying and crashing around me, and as I felt myself go unconscious, I came to a terrifying conclusion: the building was sinking. And that crazy kid who was laughing outside after all the chaos that had happened was waiting for me down on the street. When I came to, I saw a pair of sneakers. Slowly lifting my head up, I saw that kid from before, and around him, the rubble of my entire town. That lunatic hadn't settled for only my apartment, he'd brought every single building crashing down. And as I started sobbing uncontrollably, writhing on the ground, he started talking and he explained everything. I need to explain this quickly and directly, but I promise you, this is the truth. We are all living in a dream, not ours, but that kid's. He calls himself the protagonist, and to him, we're just characters that he can build up or destroy. He travels the world on whims, doing whatever he likes in random cities and towns, and then he destroys them, just like he did to mine. He erases whatever place he destroys from the dream completely, and so even if I told you the name of my town, you wouldn't know it or be able to find it. And every single time, he lets one soul survivor go, with all of his/her memories intact. I don't know why, maybe it's guilt, and his consciousness telling him not to take every single life. Or maybe it's because he's gotten bored, and wants to see some resistance. Whatever the case, I know what I need to do now. There were good, strong people from my town who were erased, and I need to get revenge for what that kid has done. What you all need to do is watch out. Be careful, because the protagonist doesn't give warning about where he'll target next. And if you do ever meet him, make sure you tell him loud and clear I'm coming after him. Story 4, Hell's Basement. It's a long-standing theory, assuming you are a believer, that hell is deep down below us and heaven is above. Now imagine if you were born or created, if you will, in hell. It would be fair to assume that you would class the world of the living above as a sort of paradise above for you and the other residents of hell, their own little heaven on earth. On this logic, it would also be fair to assume that some choose to believe there is a greater evil that strikes fear into even the most despicable abominations in hell, and that place resides below hell itself. When I died, briefly, during my commute to work, the last thing I ever considered was prejudgment for my sins throughout my time on this earth and what was in store for me after I shuffle from this mortal coil. The crash itself was a blur. I found out later someone didn't check both ways before they left their junction and completely sideswiped me, causing me to hit the center division of the highway, flipping my car multiple times, thus rendering my body a broken, bloody mess, later described by my ever-helpful brother as roadkill in a suit. The first thing I remember, before I even had chance to take in the sights and the sounds or make sense of anything logically, was the smell. It was so invasive it almost felt like I was being attacked by it, a burning putrid smell that only subsided to be replaced by a humid fleshy smell I will remember long after I'm dead, completely. I found myself sat in a bare room, bare except for me and the cold concrete slab I was sat upon. The walls were barely covered in a decaying wallpaper I assume at one time in its life was white. What was left of it had the coloration closer to a yellowish swampy green, and from the looks of it would also be sticky to the touch. Directly in front of me was a door frame with no door that led to a dimly lit corridor I had no intention of exploring, with another door frame at the other end shrouded in shadow. Down both sides of the corridor were closed doors, each with a circular hole head height, just about big enough to fit a hand into. As I looked around the room, a figure appeared in the doorway, at least 7 feet tall, shoulders touching each side of the door frame as he entered. Looking the stranger up and down, trying to take in the sheer proportions before me, it was like looking at the mountain from Game of Thrones if he took steroids, dressed like the cast of Mad Max and took body modification tips from Pinhead. Down each bicep were lacerations deep enough to see his muscles working, both wrists were cut down to the tendons, and at least 80% of his body was scorched. "Follow me," the only words to leave the stranger's mouth as he turned around to lead me down the corridor, revealing the exit wound of what must have been a double-barrel shotgun where the crown of his head used to be. By now I was certain I was dreaming, or hallucinating, or at worst this was the last torrid thoughts my brain wanted to torture me with before I passed on, if only this was the extent of the torture I was about to be acquainted with. As I followed the man down the corridor, each door passed greeted me with fresh unadulterated screams from the occupants within. I dare not peer through the crude holes in these doors as I passed to see what was causing all this hellish noise. I just knew whatever was behind these closed doors would haunt the rest of my days. As we passed through the next door, we were greeted by a middle-aged man in a black suit. His features were average for someone you'd expect to work in a bank, or a high-rise office, with his meticulous haircut and purposely shaved 5 o'clock shadow. The fact he didn't look like anyone else around here, or seem fazed by any of it, made me more nervous than the silent behemoth beside me. "Mr. Hackett, I assume you have a lot of questions for me. Due to time constraints, I request you ask as we walk. We have lots to see and only a few infinite lifetimes to see it in." And with that the man turned around and walked off down the spiral staircase situated in the room behind him, gesturing for me to follow. Where are we, and who are? Was the first words I managed to stammer as we began our descent down the spiral staircase. Sort of like a middleman, a messenger so to speak, the man replied, grabbing a torch from the stairwell. I hadn't noticed until he grabbed it that it was getting darker the further we spiraled. A middleman? A middleman for who, and where are we? Looking behind me, we were being closely followed by the behemoth, blocking any thought of retreating back up the stairs. When you had your collision, Mr. Hackett, at 8:36 a.m. the morning of Monday the 6th of August 2018, that gave all who are interested right to claim what is now rightfully theirs, in this instance, your soul. The man reeled off the information like a court summons. My soul? I exclaimed, bracing myself on the walls of the stairwell to keep myself steady. The unrelenting spiraling motion of the stairs was becoming increasingly harder to navigate. For now, yes, your soul. The man's shadow began to grow on the stairwell wall as the light from our destination began to creep up the dark stairs, flickering, almost making his shadow dance alongside us. As we reached the ground floor, every animal instinct a human possesses clawed its way to the surface, fight or flight, and I so desperately wanted to fly from this pit. I stood in the doorway trying to take in the sight before me. Large stone pillars held up the cave ceiling, rows upon rows of these pillars stretched as far as the eye could see. The pillars were all covered in what at first looked like mesh, but as I got closer to the first pillar I could see it was made of barbed wire. Wrapped around each pillar from top to bottom with very little space in between were mutilated people tangled amongst the barbed wire, with chunks of flesh missing, eyes hanging out, vomiting on the ones below, all crying out, still alive, begging for forgiveness and help. At the base of each pillar were ravenous dogs clawing and biting at anyone in reach, taking their pound of flesh, snarling at one another while keeping an eye on me as I walked by. I looked up to see a circle of birds around most pillars. Occasionally one of the huge black birds broke from the circle to dive at one of the helpless souls, biting at lips, ears and nostrils. The room was a chorus of screams from the damned. Is this hell? I asked the man, still power walking amongst the dogs without even giving them a second glance. I on the other hand had to avoid snaps from their incredibly strong jaws and nipping at my ankles as I followed. Oh no, Mr. Hackett, we've looked into your past and found you do not fit the criteria of hell, the man replied over his shoulder. Confused, then I continued, then where am I? For the crimes you've committed, and the acts you befell upon your fellow man, even the residents of hell didn't want you. So I was elected to take you under my management. Welcome to hell's basement, where the unwanted and downright worst of the worst are sent for penance. This is your preview into what you have in store, because we believe people like you should know what's coming. As if like a macabre movie reel, my mind played out all the things I had done with my time on Earth. I stood as they played out in order, not holding back any detail, physically flinching away with every memory of me striking my family pet, killing the local wildlife with my bare hands, striking my first girlfriend. I knew what was coming. It had just got past when I was a teen. I knew what was coming. Manipulating the friend of my partner to sleep with me, then convincing her to kill herself when she became unstable after the guilt had eaten her from the inside. I knew what was coming. It had to be next. I knew it was coming. My partner's little sister came into view. I show up behind her in the doorway. We talk for a little bit, then I sit on the edge of her bed. I'm all too familiar with what happened next, the manipulation, the abuse. I never intended to do anything, but the black thoughts in my head craved being satisfied, and she seemed so pure, so innocent, it felt like the only way I could be satiated. But I was wrong. This just awoke a need within me, and she wasn't enough. Over that summer I abducted, abused and killed several children, all in the same way, all without it being traced back to me. It went down as one of the most horrifying serial killers still to be caught, due to the extent the abuse I put them through and the manner I killed them, all with my bare hands and all in drawn-out unnecessary ways. I do feel remorse and I do want to be a better person, but I fear, and now I know, I've strayed too far and my judgment is soon upon me. To be continued. Story 5, I work in a haunted bookstore. If you've ever been downtown, you may have seen a small building sandwiched between what used to be the courthouse and an abandoned storage unit. Yeah, well, it's a second-hand bookstore called the Printing Press. The sign above the door is too faded to read, though, so everyone calls it Dalton's. Jerry Dalton is the owner, a 62-year-old chain smoker from Tennessee. Nevertheless, if you came inside, you'd notice how cramped the space is. There are books on tables, on shelves, in corners, and even on window stools. Then there's the musty smell of old books, and I mean old books. I swear some of these books must have been around when Jefferson was in office. That's how the store manages to get enough business to stay afloat. The books are damn near antique, the kind no other store has. And finally, you'd most likely see a tall and thin woman in her 20s with black hair covering her ears and a complexion so pale, you can't look at her for very long. Yeah, that's me. The name's Chloe. I've been working there since high school, and I don't see myself calling it quits anytime soon. If there's one thing that's scarce around here, it's help. We used to have about 8 employees, but one by one they stopped coming into work, and one by one, we found their mutilated bodies at random places in the store, except for Kim. A customer found her severed head on the occult shelf and thought it was a Halloween decoration. I told Jerry multiple times to hire a paranormal investigator, but he calls me paranoid. He said there are no haunted places, and that it's all superstition. When I heard those words, I looked at him confusedly. All right, said I, I'll give you that, but what about God and Jesus and heaven and hell? You talk about that stuff constantly. How is that any different than believing in wayward spirits? He told me to get back to work. But this isn't about Jerry. No, this story happened a week ago. It was about 6 o'clock, if I remember correctly. I was at the front desk updating inventory into the computer when I heard a thud upstairs. Max was upstairs shelving books at the time. You all right, Max? I hollered. There was no response. I shrugged it off at Max dropping a box of books and thought no more about it. That is, until I heard another several loud thuds. I sighed deeply and trudged upstairs. I found Max on a stool putting up a couple books on the top shelf. A box of books was on the cart next to him. What the hell? I asked, rolling my eyes. What the hell what? He replied, his brow furrowing. Those loud noises, I answered. What loud noises? I looked deep into his eyes. He slowly got down from the stool, took out 3 more books, and shoved them on the middle shelf. We didn't break eye contact the whole time. I voluntarily coughed to break the silence. All right, just be careful. We don't want employees with broken bones. I turned around and walked back downstairs. Max was one of those guys who hated to be supervised. He almost never talked to Jerry and didn't come to the monthly business meetings. I didn't know him well, in other words. Jerry didn't say anything about Max, though. Jerry was lenient, perhaps overly so. When I got back to the front desk, I heard another 3 or 4 thuds. I rubbed my temples, and did my best to forget about it. By this point, it must have been 6:30. The store was silent for the next 30 minutes, which was enough time to finish inventory. Then I decided I'd walk around the store and straighten up the merchandise. I did that for another 15 minutes. That's when I heard 6 louder thuds followed by a high-pitched scream. It felt like my ears exploded. Max! Max! I yelled as I jogged upstairs. But when I got to where Max had been earlier, he was gone. The box on top of the cart and the stool were exactly where I last saw them, though. I searched the upstairs, and couldn't find him. Then I went downstairs, he wasn't there, and finally to the parking lot out back. His car was still parked in its usual spot. Now, I was puzzled. Max may have been antisocial, but he hadn't left work without alerting Jerry or me. He wasn't that kind of employee. So, since I couldn't leave the store unattended, I did the next best thing, I called his cell phone. He didn't answer. At that, I called Jerry, who wasn't at the store at the time. "Yellow?" he asked in his usual southern drawl. "Jerry, thank God I got in touch with you. Max has gone missing. What should I do? My shaky voice stammered into the phone. I'd say wait for him to turn up. You'll find him eventually. Yeah, I'll find him dead. Maybe I should call the police, or maybe I should Chloe. Snapped Jerry, for the love of Jesus Christ inside us all, please shut your mouth. Everything'll be fine. Oh absolutely. I retorted, everything went fine for Edgar and Kim and Lauren, must I go on? Jerry growled. Chloe, accidents happen, you know. 7 accidents in a short time span? It's possible, Chloe. Now please, don't start yapping about the supernatural again. I've got to go. The church dinner won't be cooked by itself. And don't forget to lock up at closing time. Then he hung up on me. I tossed my phone onto the desk, cursing Jerry for being so clueless and cursing myself for my powerlessness. What was I to do? After all, for all I knew, I was going to be the next victim. I decided, since there was no customer in sight, to go upstairs and look much more thoroughly. Out of caution, I walked up the stairs very slowly and quietly, occasionally calling out for Max in a soft voice. But I'm not sure why I bothered with all that. Ghosts can see you after all, even if you can't see them. But I couldn't be sure it was a ghost. A vampire maybe? No, none of the victims had punctured necks. What about a werewolf? No, that can't be it either. You'd think I might have found some hair scattered around. My mind was functioning at 1,000,000 miles a minute with dozens of other possibilities, but none of them seemed to make any sense with what I knew. So, I tried to put it out of my mind and looked for signs of Max. I checked the windows, they were all still locked. I looked at the hardwood floor carefully for any scratches or signs of a struggle. I couldn't find any. That's when I heard the thuds again. I jumped, but stayed as quiet as possible. The thuds seemed to be coming from above the ceiling. Above the ceiling, I thought to myself, I don't think there's anything up there but mice. And yet, those thuds could not be made by a mouse. I tiptoed back downstairs to look for Jerry's crowbar. I did my best not to mess with too much stuff in his office. I didn't want him to know I'd been looking around. He always told the employees to stay out of his office, but this was an emergency. The crowbar, it turns out, was in his liqueur cabinet. I was a little disturbed at that, but this wasn't the time to psychoanalyze Jerry. I needed to look for Max, and at the very least, figure out what's making that sound I've been hearing all evening. I think it was 7:30 by then. When I got back upstairs, I stood there in the same spot I'd heard the thuds. I couldn't hear them anymore, but I knew all I needed to do was wait. I waited like a cheetah stalking a gazelle. My whole body was drenched in sweat, and I felt very gross, but that was only a small price to pay if I could find Max. The thuds finally came, and they were directly above my head. I got Max's stool, stood on it and used the crowbar with unprecedented ease. I guess it's hard to know what you can do when you're pee your pants scared. I took the ceiling tile off methodically so I didn't damage it, and slow enough so I could grab it with my hands and set it on the floor. I stood on the stool just staring at the newly made hole in the ceiling. I don't know if I was scared or just questioning what I was doing in the first place. Sometimes I wonder if I had any idea what I was looking for, because I sure don't in retrospect. I guess I was on edge. My breathing was heavy though silent, and I even felt a little nauseous. Anyway, I finally got the nerve to look into the ceiling's hole. It was, as you'd expect, pitch black, and I could barely see anything. I shrugged my shoulders in relief. But when I turned around to look at the other side, I was greeted by the most frightening thing I'd ever seen. I screamed louder than I thought was humanly possible, and tumbled off the stool and crashed onto the floor. I was so petrified that I was stuck lying in that spot. I stared up at the hole once more. I was certain I was startled by a human face, a very disgusting and deformed human face, but before I could meditate it, a few more thuds echoed from the hole. Then I heard the sound of something being dragged slowly and purposefully. As is my usual procedure in such scenarios, I closed my eyes and mumbled about wanting my mommy. My eyes involuntarily opened when I heard some large object dropped on the floor next to me. If I thought my scream before was loud, my second scream topped that by several decibels. I crawled backwards until I hit a wall. I was in denial of what I was seeing. It was Max. Well, or what was left of Max, anyway. Half of his face was just muscle and bone, and his chest cavity was entirely ripped open. The body was also missing a leg, his right leg. The rest of his body had numerous bite marks, scratches, and cuts. The culprit soon dropped down. This time, I didn't scream. I was too shocked. The creature's face looked human, except its nose was flat. The ears were pointed and the eyes were large and with diamond-shaped pupils. Its mouth was full of very sharp teeth. The body was also very human with long arms and legs, except it was crouched like a cat. The skin was a light blue, and it had wings folded at its side. Our eyes met and my heart skipped 2 or 3 beats, and I almost forgot to breathe. It stood on its hind legs and started walking towards me while its tongue twitched and it cried out like a hawk. I was thinking about all the people that'd be at my funeral and the list was, I confess, quite short. I was too much of a workaholic to have a boyfriend, and I was an only child. There was my dad, an uncle, and my maternal grandmother. Oh, and my cousin who's 10 times hotter than me and I hate her. You have some pretty strange thoughts you have when you think you're about to die. But then I remembered the mace I had in my pocket, and I thought, oh wait, I don't want to die. I waited until the creature's face was inches from mine, and I sprayed it like my life was dependent on it, because it kinda was. And I always thought mace was made for muggers. I should market some monster-specific mace. I bet I'd make a killing, but I got a C- in high school chemistry. Oh well, a girl can dream. Where was I? Oh yes, the mace. The creature howled in irritation as it shook its head, which gave me enough time to rush downstairs. I pushed books behind me as I ran in the hopes of creating obstacles. I looked behind me and saw the creature quickly jumping onto walls to try to pounce on me. I was heading towards the door, until I felt something grab my leg and I hit the floor. I looked behind me, and saw the creature's spindly fingers around my ankles. It hissed at me and bent over to try to start chowing down. Instinctually, I swung my hand and knocked it across the head. It fell over in pain. I suddenly backtracked upstairs, remembering the crowbar. I grabbed it and hid behind a bookcase. I knew that wouldn't last long, but there was nowhere else to go. I heard the familiar thuds, and soon saw the thing above me upside down on the ceiling. It lunged, and I ran out of the way. It slammed into the bookcase which fell sideways and crashed into the next bookcase, which did the same like several dominoes. I was almost crushed. The creature at this point was furious. I hid behind one of the bookcase that wasn't toppled over. When all I heard was silence for about 30 seconds, I slowly tiptoed forward and peeked around the corner. The creature was there, and he spit some green mush at me. I ducked thankfully and saw the mush hit the wall. It bled right through the wall in seconds. I had to climb over bookcases to get back to the stairs, the creature spitting in my direction and creating holes in everything from the floor to the fallen bookcases. I was trying to rationally understand what to do, but I couldn't think at all. All that was active at that point was the lizard brain, which said I had to fight him off. I finally reached the front door, but I didn't rush outside as was my original plan. I slowly turned around to see the creature standing feet from me. It took a step forward, and I swung the crowbar like a baseball bat. It slapped the creature, which jumped in the air, flapping its wings violently. I slid underneath it and hit it again on the back of the head. Unexpectedly, the creature grabbed my arm, and bit deep into it. I cried in agony, but used my good arm to start punching it in the head. When it let go, I kicked it with my foot which caused it to fall onto its stomach. My arm was bleeding like a waterfall, but I couldn't do anything about it. The odd thing is that I didn't even feel the pain in that moment. Maybe it was the adrenaline. I am done with you, I said to the creature, but really I was saying it more to myself because I doubt the creature understood English. The creature got on all 4 legs and started flapping its wings again until it was in the air in front of me. It let out a loud noise before coming at me. I jumped right at it, and plunged the crowbar right into its left eye. The creature fell to the ground, its swing trying to cover the wound. I got on my knees, gave it one final look before finding the crowbar a home in its heart. The creature immediately stopped moving. I stood up, walked a few feet, and everything went black. I woke up in a room with almost blinding fluorescent lights. When my vision managed to focus, I realized I was in a comfortable bed with an 4 in one arm and heavy bandaging on the other. My eyes started darting around, and I saw Jerry sitting in a chair near the end of the bed. He was looking at some trashy magazine. When he realized I woke up, he threw the magazine across the room. I wasn't reading that magazine. Jerry whined, it's just that, don't judge me, Chloe. My head was throbbing. Where am I? You're in the hospital. A customer walked in around 8:30 last night, and found you unconscious on the floor with books all over the place, he explained. When he said that, all the memories came flooding back over me. I sat up. Jerry, I found Max's body and there was this humanoid bat-like creature and hush, Chloe. You need to rest, you lost a lot of blood. I don't know how in the world you made such a mess, but you're currently my only employee, so it's not like I'm gonna fire you or anything. What about Max? I questioned. You didn't find his body? What about the bat creature? Chloe, please, hold on 1 second. I was there and a customer was there and even a couple policemen were there. We checked the entire place, and we saw no Max and of course we didn't find any bat creatures. You need to stop reading those horror stories. Oh, and don't think it's just me here. I called your dad. He's been here with me, but he just went to the bathroom a minute ago. I nodded and let my head hit the pillow. I decided that I shouldn't argue with Jerry when I was recovering. Thankfully, my injury wasn't that bad and I was out of the hospital the next day. But I didn't go back to work for a couple days. Jerry almost never gave me vacation time, so I gladly took it when he offered. Anyway, that's it for this story. There are plenty more because the printing press seems to attract everything from aliens to sentient robots. But I'm writing this on my lunch break, and it's about time to get back to work. Besides, there's some girl floating around the store moaning something about Satan rising again, so I should probably go check that out. Plus, we just got a new shipment of books that needs to be sorted, so I'll talk to you later. Story 6, Another Day of Being a Drug Dealer. The stash was hidden in one of the vacant houses near the corner we dealt. Most of the homes here were abandoned. Some of them were vandalized, some of them turned into junkie dens and the rest had their windows and doors nailed shut. So we swooped in, found one that suited our needs, and turned it into a small safe house for our dealings. This part of town was the kind of place where you could find yourself standing over a dead person, and just keep on with your day. The whole fucking place was an eyesore. Not even the police would come around, no one to protect here I guess. There was an apartment building nearby, a place infested with rats and vermin, small holes for troubled families that could barely afford a roof over their heads without having to fight for one of the vacant houses. Something I thought about quite often was that most of the children growing up in those families would end up junkies, drug dealers or criminals. This wasn't a place for a decent person, and we didn't get any of those anyways. The whole area was past the old industrial complex. It was hard to get here, even by accident. It was late in the afternoon, when I got to my corner. Mike and Chad, a couple of guys from my crew, were already there. "You're late," Mike said. Mike was the muscle, he was a guy you didn't want to mess with. He was raised in this life, he was dealing since he was 12, and he killed his first at 15. He was short, well-built and had the most charming meth addiction you could ever see, so you can understand that with Mike, there weren't much to say. Chad on the other hand was a mellow guy. He was in charge of the product, where it was and how much was it. He was the one counting. Every day he would check the stash and then the money you made from it. If everything was okay, you could go get a good night's sleep. If your count was wrong, then Mike would come in and things would get ugly. "Leave the kid alone," Mike. Chad said. "Go check the stash." Mike made an angry grimace and mumbled something as he was leaving. I didn't like Mike. He was a liability, getting high, getting out of line, constantly trying to pick a fight, constantly looking for trouble, and that was bad for business. But he was good at being the muscle. A glance at the guy and you would just cross the road without looking twice at him. "It's too quiet today, don't you think?" he asked me while looking at the sky. "What do you mean? I've been here since noon, and I haven't seen another person walking the streets," he said. "Fuck, really?" I answered back. "There is no one around," he responded. He was right. There was no one on the street, not even a stray cat or dog. Usually, local kids would play around making noise, junkies would come and go. "You're right, what do you?" A shot cut my sentence in half. Chad was taken aback and snapped his head towards the direction we heard the shot. It came from down the street, where Mike went. "Stay here, keep an eye out, anything weird you come get us, okay?" I waved yes. He left in a rush. I quickly grabbed a gun we had tapped behind a drain pipe and placed it on my jacket. A million thoughts swarmed my mind. Was another crew making a move to claim our corners? Maybe a junkie got stupid enough to try and rob us, or was it the cops? But a single shot, just a shot. If it was the cops, then Mike would have emptied half his mag on them before he got shot down. Another crew would hit the corner first, then the stash, and they wouldn't just shoot at us, and not one time. As I tried to figure out what might have happened, I realized something. Where is Chad? I checked my cell phone. He was gone for at least 20 minutes, and something was definitely up. Maybe it was a trap. They took out Mike and Chad, and when I get there to check on them, they jump me. No one was around, so I took my gun out and start walking towards the safe house. It didn't take much to get there, so I found myself standing in front of it. It was a broken-down house. Years and years had laid their waste upon it. Clusters of bushes and wild grass were slowly surrounding it, as it stood miserably in the middle. I slowly went around the back. The first thing I noticed was the unhinged fake window we used to cover our entrance. Someone was in, but who? I slowly paced towards the window. "Leave the kid alone, Mike," Chad's voice, clear as day, coming from inside the house. Frozen in my steps, I looked towards the window. He told me that before, why would he say it now? "Leave the kid alone, Mike," Chad's voice again. I took a couple of steps forward, my eyes were fixed on the window. I took another step closer to the window when I heard a light board cracking from inside. I looked, trying to make something through the darkness, but to no avail. Then I heard another crack from inside. Soft as the first one, then another and another, each crack closer than the last. Something was closing on the window, but it was too dark to see. A figure stopped 3 feet from the window. It was hard to make out any more details, but the whole thing was getting weird. "Leave the kid alone, Mike," I heard once again. Now I knew that the figure closing in the window was Chad. Was he getting a goddamn stroke? I grabbed his shirt and pulled him towards me. He was weightless. For a moment I thought he was hanged from the ceiling. I pushed him one more time. He just wiggled. "Leave the kid alone, Mike," the voice echoed behind Chad. I jumped inside, took out my phone and turned the light on. The room lit up. Chad was there, but he wasn't standing, he was levitating, or so I thought. His feet were 2 or 3 inches from the floor, his pants were bloody and dirty, he still wiggled back and forth. His belt was hanging from his waist, and his jersey was a big blood stain. His neck seemed a piece of rubber holding something. Even then I saw the fingers. Something was holding him from the top of his skull. I saw 3 pale fingers covering his face, as my gaze followed it. A long slender arm continued from behind his back, ending up on a creature I've never seen before. It was standing 3 feet behind Chad, holding him like a toy a few feet in front of it. It had a slender humanoid build. Its arms were long, unnaturally long, ending in long thin fingers. One of the arms was touching the floor as the other held Chad from the top of his head. Tears were running down his eyes like a damn waterfall. His mouth was wide open, moving slightly up and down. He was in agony, but alive, I think. Then from behind Chad something appeared. A long white arm smashed the floor in front of me and I fell back again. I couldn't believe my eyes. A slender humanoid crawled its way to me. It was tall, 10 maybe 15 feet tall. It was standing on its knees, one arm in front of me and the other holding Chad up in the air. It didn't have any facial feature, just two very large yellow eyes, in an empty face. He shook Chad violently through the air. I could hear bones breaking and the horrible sound of muscle being torn apart. Then it looked at Chad, then at me. It crawled a little closer and widened his eyes even more. Leave the kid alone, Mike. I felt like a statue for a moment, frozen solid. Leave the kid alone, Mike. Leave the kid alone, Mike. Leave the kid alone, Mike. The voice came from the creature. He kept saying the same thing while he was shaking Chad towards me, just like you would do with a stray dog that wouldn't get the treat you offered it. It started to slowly crawling towards me. It snapped its head up and then stayed motionless for a split second. Then all of a sudden, he looked at Chad and slowly brought him closer to me. His now lifeless body crawled on the dirty floor. Leave the kid alone, Mike. But Chad didn't move at all. I spotted my gun 2 or 3 feet away from me. I slowly reached for it without taking my eyes from that thing. The gun was almost in my hand when it used his arm to punch the wall, not 3 inches from my face. I closed my eyes. I could hardly breathe. My mind was numb. Something smooth and cold touched my face. I opened my eyes. Its face was touching mine. It kept watching me for what seemed an eternity. I could now touch my gun. The creature backed up slowly, then it grabbed Chad's head with both hands. It looked at it for a moment and then turned to me again. Leave the kid alone, Mike. The kid will be here, Mike. Shut the fuck up or it's you going down tonight. If the boss finds out about your free time dealings, you're dead meat. You know that. Its eyes grew bigger as colorful lines started to change their color. It was like a twirling rainbow. The more it shined, the more it talked. Mike will be there tonight, so, no. They get word you re on him and he's gone just like that. Give me some time maybe. And the words stopped. The bullet hit the thing right between the eyes. The next one missed. The third got him in the chest. It slowly placed its finger on the hole between his eyes, then looked at me. You were to shriek so loud, it made my ears hurt. I used this distraction to get away. For a split second, I think it tried to grab me. I guess I was faster. I was pissing my pants as I ran towards my corner. I could feel the warm piss getting colder on my thighs as I ran. And then I did something idiotic. I looked back. I saw arms breaking the nailed windows. I saw rooftops being smashed. Creatures appearing from the alleys all around the vacant homes, but that wasn't the scary part. Each and every creature held a person in their embrace and they just looked at me. The last thing I remembered was words and discussions filling the air around me, like the wind was trying to remember a song. I think they were everywhere. I just ran after that, from town to town, doing anything I could to get some money here and there. I wrote this because an hour ago someone knocked my door. The only thing they said was leave the kid alone, Mike. Story 7, my friend's son isn't the same anymore. Losing a child has got to be the greatest loss possible. I don't have any children, so I cannot emphasize with such a loss. Therefore, I will not judge my friend for his actions. I will, however, hate myself for getting involved in this sordid affair. I don't have many friends, so it definitely hurt to see my friend, who I will refer to as A, decline into a life of madness after losing his son. Seeing his son get ravaged by a brain tumor was equally painful to watch. But even more painful to me was how hollow the ordeal had left him. He no longer had any gleam in his eyes, or any liveliness in his voice. He became a recluse, turning down any offers for company or help. His wife had died a few years earlier, so he truly lived a life of solitude. I was worried he would end it all. It may have been better that way, for what followed is a nightmare that I will never escape. It was about 10 months after Ray's son died when a series of odd occurrences hit the town. I remember reading about the first one on Facebook. I'm a bit of a holdout with technology, but even I don't read the paper anymore. There had been acts of vandalism at the town cemetery. Even worse, the malicious acts had been directed at the grave of A's son. The grave had been exhumed, and the poor boy's body stolen. Such sickness exists in some minds. I couldn't even imagine how A had reacted to such news, but he still refused to see me. He told me he was busy. I didn't have the heart to fight with him, and left him alone. As I walked away from his door, I could have sworn I saw a pale face in the window of his son's old bedroom. After being so coldly rebuffed, I decided I would no longer try to contact A. I decided he would contact me when he was ready to do so. And so months went by without talking to him. It was during this time when the attacks started. It was a warm summer night when screams were heard in the house next to A's. There had been arguments between the couple there before, and as a result nobody really thought anything of it. At least until neither of them showed up for work the next day. Both of them had been mauled and viciously torn open. The bite marks on them seemed to be from a human, although nobody wanted to think a human, let alone one in our small town, was capable of this. Nonetheless, it was clear the attacker was a man. Police took molds of the bite marks, but did not have any suspect to compare with. Police were baffled, and any hopes of quickly solving the case were dashed. There were 4 other incidents after that, but not nearly as savage as the first. In fact, none of the other 4 were confirmed murders, but just disappearances. As a result, the next 4 incidents are not believed to be related to the first. But all 4 kidnappings are definitely related to one another. It was before the kidnappings, and after the grisly double murder, that I saw A again. Not intentionally though. I ran into him at the hardware store. This is an encounter I will always remember. A was markedly different. He had circles under his eyes, and appeared gaunt and ill. Worse still were the marks on his face and arms. Horrible scratch marks covered them, and a couple even looked infected. But worse of all was how broken he was. He was even more broken than when his son had succumbed, or at any time since. "Are you okay?" I asked, more concerned than ever. "Fine," I said before trailing off. "What do you need those chains and locks for?" I asked, noticing his items for the first time. I simply muttered something unintelligible before walking away from me. That was the last time I saw A, until last night. There was a knock at my door shortly before midnight, and I was shocked to see it was A. My God, he looked worse than ever. His scratches had healed, and there were no fresh ones. But he was more gaunt and sickly looking, with further augmented circles under his nearly listless eyes. Upon opening the door, I was greeted by him before I could speak. "I need your help." He practically sobbed. "Get man, it's all right. I'm here for you. You look like hell." I answered. "I know," he whined. "I screwed up bad. You need to help me. It's hard to feed him. I need you to help me." "Who are you talking about? Who are you feeding?" I asked, utterly baffled. "My son." I almost shouted. "Are you sure you're okay?" I was genuinely concerned for his mental health now. "No. I'm not okay. Please come back to my place." I pleaded with me. I relented. I didn't consider him a threat, and figured it couldn't hurt to humor his fantasy. Upon getting to A's house, he led me directly to the shed behind his house. I watched in confusion as he struggled to drag a trash bag to the shed, and screamed when he opened it. Inside was the body of a young woman. It looked as if she had been bludgeoned and strangled to death. This must have been the 4th disappearance in our town, the 4th since that day in July that I saw A in the store. I seemed to ignore my scream, and I struggled to form words, as A opened the door to the shed. Just as I found my voice, I heard the rattling of chains, followed by the sounds of the chains going taut, like when a dog runs to the end of its chain. I could see A crying as a grotesque arm shot out of the darkness. It was white, and marred by scars and stitches. It grabbed the woman's body and pulled it into the dark abyss of the shed. I heard a horrible, inhuman screech, followed by the sound of flesh being torn and bones being crushed. Sickening crunching and slurping sounds assaulted my ears and sanity. I fumbled around in my pocket, attempting to get out my phone's flashlight. I seemed to realize this, slamming the door shut and screaming at me. "No. He doesn't like light," I said, voice strained with stress and sadness. "A, what the fuck is this?" I said, finally confronting him. "I never should have done this. But I can't lose him a second time," I cried. "This is insane. You killed people for that thing. That isn't your son. I'm telling the police," I said. Before I could move to leave, I pulled out a pistol. "You run, or do anything funny, you're his next meal," I threatened. I put my hands up defensively, nodding my agreement. After a tense standoff, let me leave, telling me we'd get a new meal in a few days. I can't do this, I won't. I've got to put that creature back in the grave. I've got to liberate A from his insanity, one way or another. I can't let that desecration of his son wreak any more havoc. Story 8, The Phone. This happened about 10 years ago. I live in a little town right near the Virginia/West Virginia state lines and work for a small factory that makes pulleys. Really? Pulleys? I work second shift, 3 p.m. until midnight, Sunday through Thursday. I'm on an assembly line and I drill holes and join the two sides of the pulley with rivets. It's monotonous, but I guess it pays okay and the work isn't too hard. I live with my wife, Sarah, and our 10-month-old daughter, Deborah, in a small house on my parents' property. Sarah works part-time days at the Dollar General in town. My dad always liked his privacy, so we're at the end of a long dirt road. It's a bitch to get in and out when it snows or rains heavy. Luckily, we have four-wheel drive vehicles, so it's a little better. So anyway, I was heading home one night and as I rounded a bend in our road I saw a telephone in the middle of the road. It was an old-fashioned one, rotary dial, like my grandparents had. Granddaddy told me one time he got it new in 1931. Otherwise I probably wouldn't have had any idea how old it was. As strange as it was to see that phone in the middle of the road, I noticed it had a long, black phone cord running off the back of it into the woods. I stopped my truck and looked at it for a few moments. What the hell? I thought. Where did this thing come from? I put my truck in park and got out of the cab and walked towards it slowly. It was lit up fine by my truck headlights as I walked towards it. It was puzzling why an old-fashioned phone would be sitting in the exact center of our road, but even more so why a long phone wire led to the woods. I went back to my truck and got out a flashlight and shone it on the cord. I followed it to the wood's edge and shone my light deeper into it. The cord kept going, but I decided not to follow it right then. Instead I went back to the phone itself, knelt down and looked at it. I reached out to touch it and it was cold to the touch. Not the regular outside temperature for a fall day, but cold. Cold. I drew my hand back and pondered it for a few minutes. No flashes of inspiration came to me, so I touched it again. This time it was a normal temperature, as if it had been sitting outside for a while. Which it had, I guess. Without knowing what else to do, I picked up the receiver and put it to my ear. I got a dial tone and then I heard a ringing on the other end, as if the phone had connected itself to another phone. It rang 4 times, and someone picked up. I pulled the handset away from my ear a little when I heard a voice say, "Hey. I've been waiting for your call. How was work tonight?" I automatically said, "It was okay, I guess." "Good, good," and then a weird laugh. "Who are you?" I said. "Or, you don't know me. Or maybe you do. I'm not sure." And then that laugh again. "Where are you?" "I don't expect you really want to know that, David." I was shocked he or she/it knew my name. "Why not?" I asked. "People don't like to think about places like this," the voice said. "It just makes them feel uncomfortable and, icky." That laugh again. "What do you want?" I said, worried. "I just wanted to get acquainted," the voice said. "We'll be talking again soon." With that the call clicked off and the phone went flying, literally, as if someone had yanked the cord. I jumped back as the handset jerked out of my hand and watched in horror as the phone disappeared. I jumped up, turned my flashlight on and ran to the edge of the woods. I shone my light, but there was no trace of either the phone or the cord. I just stood there feeling like an idiot until I snapped out of it and walked back to my truck. I got in and drove home. "You're late," Sarah said as I walked in the door. "Yeah," I replied. I wanted to tell her about the phone but figured she'd think I was making things up. After a while I began to wonder if it had actually happened or if I was just so tired I was dreaming. Sarah fixed me something to eat and then we crawled into bed. I slept fitfully that night and finally got out of bed around 5:30. I was sitting on the front porch when Sarah came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat beside me. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You were tossing and turning all night. Is something wrong?" "Nah," I said as I shrugged my shoulders. "I just couldn't sleep." Okay. Do you want some breakfast? I'd love some, I replied and went into the house to help her. Do you want me to get Deborah up now or let her sleep? Just let her sleep. We could use some alone time, said Sarah. I wasn't much help as I sat at the table and watched her cook. She made bacon, eggs and home-fried potatoes. We ate in silence. I'll clean the kitchen up, I said. You go get ready for work. She nodded her head and walked down the hall. I washed the dishes and put them in the drainer and then sat down in the den in front of the TV. There really wasn't much on as I flipped through the channels. She came down the hall, kissed me and said, "I'll see you later. What do you have planned for today?" I shrugged my shoulders, "Nothing really. Just relax some. If you get a chance, could you fix that broken line on the clothesline? Please." Deborah finally got up around 9:30. I fed her and got her dressed and took her outside and put her in her bouncy seat while I worked on replacing the clotheslines. I figured if one broke the others might not be too far behind. It took me about an hour and a half, and while I was putting the supplies and tools away I heard a phone ring. An old-fashioned phone ring. I stepped out of the shed and looked around. Where was it coming from? It was then that I noticed that same black phone sitting on our back porch. I also noticed that Deborah's bouncy seat was sitting by the porch. Empty. I ran across the yard and looked around. She was nowhere in sight. I grabbed the phone. Hello. Hello. Who's there? I yelled. I heard that weird laugh I had heard before, and then the voice says, "Tell Daddy goodbye, sweetie." Then I heard a baby cry. Deborah's cry. What have you done, you bastard? Where's my daughter? Give her back to me now. We'll see, David. We'll see. The laugh, and then the line went dead. This time the phone just disappeared into thin air. Right out of my hand. What the hell was going on? Was this for real or was I hallucinating? Maybe I had had a stroke or some type of mental breakdown. I didn't know what to do. I pulled my cell phone out and started to dial 9,1. What was I going to say to the police? That my daughter had disappeared, and a mysterious antique phone had appeared, and disappeared, out of nowhere? I finally dialed 911 and explained that my daughter had disappeared while we were out in the yard. The dispatcher said she'd get someone out here right away. 15 minutes later I heard a siren and ran to the front yard. The cop car slid to a stop and Davy Mullins, who I had graduated high school with, climbed out. I explained what had happened minus the phone. I said that no one had come into my yard and I had no idea what had happened to Deborah. Davy asked if Deborah could have climbed out of the seat and walked away, and I told him that she was just at the point of crawling. He looked at the seat and saw that the seat belt was still buckled. He then asked if I had seen any animals around and I said no. Then Davy started asking me if I was feeling okay or if I was having thoughts about hurting myself. Or others. I yelled at him, "No, God damn it. I'm fine and I resent the fact that you think I'd do something to my own daughter. I love her." Davy walked around the house and into the woods after telling me to stay on the front porch. While he was gone I called Sarah and told her that Deborah was missing. She began screaming at me and asking me what I had done. I tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't have it. She told me she'd be home as soon as she could get there. Davy came around the house as soon as I hung up with Sarah. He told me he'd call in and get some help searching. In the meantime, he said he wanted to look around inside the house. I took him in and he slowly looked through every room. Of course, he found nothing, so he shrugged and walked back out to the yard after telling me to stay in the house. He took my cell phone and unplugged the house phone and put them in the front seat of his car. I watched him through the windows as he slowly walked around the backyard. He walked around the shed and kicked at some piles of dirt around the edge of the garden. Was he actually looking for a grave? For that matter, did he think I had done something to my own daughter? Christ. Suddenly I was very tired and sat down in the recliner and closed my eyes. I jumped when the phone rang. Wait, what? Davy had taken our phone out to his car. What the hell was ringing then? I got up and walked into the kitchen, and there, on the kitchen table, was that black phone. I picked up the receiver and said, H. Hello? I heard Sarah's voice sounding like she was in a big empty room. Her voice echoing. David, David? Hello? David? Where are you? I can't see anything. I don't know what's going on. Please, honey, help me. The phone hung up just as I heard that strange, but now familiar laugh. I think I must have passed out because the next thing I knew I woke up in the back of an ambulance speeding down the road. They took me to the emergency room and examined me. A doctor came in and asked me a bunch of questions and then told me he was going to admit me for a 72-hour hold. I don't know how long I've been here now. That damn black phone is sitting on the floor next to my wheelchair. It keeps ringing but I'm not going to answer it. I'm just not. Story 9, I grew up in the Everglades, and have some stories I'd like to share. My name is Clark Stacy. I was born and raised in the deep Everglades of Florida, a place where many city slickers have deemed uninhabitable, but a country boy like me can find solace in the lush greenery and plentiful wildlife. From the birds to the boas, I was a friend of the flora and fauna. The relationship was, on occasion, not mutual. The skeeters and nosy''m.s were dreadful. The nearly daily rains were unbearable. There was a man eating clam in our backyard. Okay, maybe not that last one. But I do have some fucked up tales from the forest. I'll get it out of the way right now. My parents divorced when I was too young to approach the situation rationally, but old enough to know what it meant. In short, I thought it was my fault. That's just about when I started going on adventures through the thick brush and humid swamps. It was the only way I could really take my mind off of home stuff and put it on keeping my ass alive. But enough about me, I know why you came here. Have you ever heard the song Gator Country by Molly Hatchet? It's about Florida. Hell, I've probably seen more individual alligators than I have human beings. One drizzly day, I ventured out about a mile from my backwoods home through the dank forests. I found a clearing, about 30 feet in diameter, with the prettiest daisies and petunias I had ever seen. As I stepped into the clearing, the rain subsided and the sheer Florida sun caressed and massaged my waterlogged skin. As I basked in this heavenly feeling, I heard a heavy rustle in the tree line. I went from pure ecstasy to a dead standstill. Just about anything could have made that noise, and half of the things it could have been were capable of killing me. For reasons I can't really explain, I wanted to take that 50-50 chance. It was shortly after the divorce, and I felt myself completely numb and invulnerable to danger. Mere feet away from the source of my curiosity, I heard a soft, gravely voiced Clark. Terror gripped the very fiber of my being, and I felt every muscle tense up. I leapt away from the thick brush just in time as a full-grown gator lashed out and tried to catch me in his gaping maw. When I say full-grown, I mean at least 16 feet long, and as fat as those folks in line at Walmart. I ran like a man hopefully only has to run once or twice in his life, with his life on the line and adrenaline coursing through his veins. I raced through the overpowering greenery, collecting nasty cuts from the razor-sharp palm fronds. I got home and was interrogated by my mom about why I was near covered in blood and breathing like a maniac. I explained that I saw a gator and split. She said that thems is more afraid of you as you is of them. Yeah right. Now, after that experience any rational person would stop going into deep woods, alone. But I'm not a normal person, and that experience was far from the scariest. Once, during winter, I was exploring a little closer to home. I discovered a banked creek under a thick canopy. I quickly checked my phone's map to see what body of water it connected to, only to find that it wasn't on the map. That should have been enough to turn me around and send me home, but I was feeling adventurous. I wasn't about to get frazzled by some pathetic, uncharted creek, so I hopped down to the bank and started walking along the sandy slopes. It only took me 3 minutes of walking to find a large carved-out cavern, the kind an alligator would sleep in during the colder months. I saw a decent-sized stone in the creek and got the worst idea of my life. I picked up the stone and chucked it into the moist, dark abode. What I heard was not a sound a gator is capable of making. It sounded more like a silverback gorilla whose genitals were just ripped off with a pair of needle-nose pliers. The sound reverberated in my lungs and shook my body to its core. I bolted along the bank with a pace that could put Usain Bolt to shame. I looked over my shoulder to see whose slumber I had interrupted, and I truly wish I hadn't. I saw a humanoid figure, standing at maybe 10 feet tall, covered in matted, auburn fur. It bellowed once again. I found where I had entered the creek's shores and flew home. That was the last time I ever went out into the wilderness. Me and Mom recently moved to the suburbs to the north of the Everglades, and I could not be happier. But sometimes, while laying at night, I feel a strange attraction to the beasts of my true home. Story 10, Gloss Lake. I never wanted to be a mother. I always pictured an adventurous life for myself. I imagined traveling and meeting all kinds of new people and experiencing as much foreign culture as I could. But, as the great John Lennon or Alan Saunders said, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. That being said, my daughter was born August 24, 1995. I named her Grace. I never wanted to be a mother, but as soon as I became one, I didn't want to be anything else. I didn't know Grace's father. We had met at a party, hooked up, and I never saw him again. I obviously didn't get pregnant on purpose. I was 19 years old, for heaven's sake. And if I'm being honest, getting an abortion crossed my mind a time or two during my pregnancy, but the one thing that always stopped me was my extremely religious mother. I thought about giving Grace up for adoption, but once I laid my eyes on her, there was no way that was going to happen. Grace went missing in October of 2002. She was never found. Not one single trace of her. All I know is that I put her to bed one night, and she was gone in the morning. My last words to her were, "Good night, my sweet angel." And that's it. The police tried their hardest to track her down. There were so many questions. There were search parties, flyers, phone calls. Lonnie Clark swore up and down that she saw my Grace at the grocery store with a strange man. After a few years passed, it felt almost like Grace was never here in the first place. Like I imagined her in my mind. Of course I know that's not true, because I have talked to her 3 times this week on the phone. The first call was very strange. I could hear a faint hello, but it almost sounded like she was underwater. I didn't even know it was her. I just thought someone had a bad connection. The wrong number even. By the second phone call, I had a feeling it was her. She sounded older, but it was the same sweet voice as my Grace. I was so overwhelmed and confused. By the third phone call, I could actually understand the words she was saying. "Mama," she said. I said, "Grace, is that you?" "Yes, Mama. It's me. I want to come home." My mind was reeling. In a way, I thought this was some sick prank. Some asshole's idea of something funny, that wasn't funny at all. I know that there was no hard evidence that she was dead, but she's been gone for 15 years. There aren't many cases where they're still alive after so much time. I'd like that too, I said, but if this is really Grace, I'm going to need some proof. There was a moment of hesitant silence. Then I heard, "Gloss Lake. October." Then the line went dead. She's called me a few more times, but I'm terrified to answer the phone. Most people would be excited to have their baby back, but I'm not. Like I said before, I never wanted to be a mother. Which is why I drowned my daughter in Gloss Lake in October of 2002. Story 11, There Are No Ghosts Here. Jeremiah shoved the camera in my face and I promptly pushed it away. He grinned at me as he hopped back and cradled the small camera against his chest. "Does this mean you're not ready for your close-up?" he asked as he turned the camera towards Rosa. She smiled at the camera and blew it a kiss. "You just caught me by surprise, that's all," I said, turning away, looking up at the dark tunnel ahead of us. It was a lot bigger up close. From the road it had not looked nearly as intimidating. Being this close I could finally get the size of it. It resembled a dark and gaping mouth, large enough to swallow trains whole and spit them out on the other side. It was cold too. The air blowing out from the tunnel was freezing, making it a stark contrast between the hot summer day. I could not see the light at the end of the tunnel as there was a slight curve in its center, so the exit was hidden. The cold air should have been refreshing considering how hot it was today. The heat index alone put the temperature just over 100 degrees. But I shivered as the breeze from that dark place blew over me. I could smell mold and damp coming from the tunnel as well. We were in the middle of a mild drought that summer, and I wondered how it was possible for anything to retain moisture in the suffocating heat. "So this is the place," Rosa said as she walked towards the tunnel entrance. She stood in front of it with her hands on her hip, assessing it like it was something she wanted to buy. So far she did not seem to be impressed. She kicked at the gravel and sent a few pieces of tiny stone skittering into the darkness. There were old pieces of garbage littering the place, broken bottles and some sun-bleached wrappers. No graffiti though, which seemed odd to me. The whole place had a feeling of an abandoned tomb. I honestly thought it was going to be bigger. She laughed as she turned back to us. "It's actually not that long of a tunnel. If you were on a train you would be through it in under 30 seconds. Jeremiah explained as he held up the camera. He filmed the entrance with more enthusiasm than a hole in a hill deserved. "How long would it take you to walk the entire thing?" Ashton asked from behind Jeremiah. This was the first time he had spoken during our short hike to the tunnel. Compared to the rest of us, Ashton was the most out of shape. He was not doing well in the heat and his body was covered in sweat. The walk from the road to the tunnel was long but not particularly difficult, but it was enough to work up a sweat even on a cool day. He was also carrying a backpack filled with water and snacks. We weren't sure how long we would be out here, and he had insisted on carrying it. Ashton walked over to the shade of some nearby trees and sat down in the sparse grass. He was still breathing heavily as he opened up a bottle of water from the pack, downing half of it in a few gulps. "If it's a long walk, can we rest a bit first? I kinda need to catch my breath." He was panting hard even after the water and his face was a bright beet red. "Yeah man, take your time. I got to film a little bit of backstory anyway," Jeremiah answered as he walked over to Ashton, sitting next to his friend in the shade of the trees. I joined them too. The shade of the tree was much more welcome than the heat. Rosa stayed in the sun, stretching. She was the best in shape compared to the rest of us. She regularly jogged and she was decked out in her favorite Lululemon outfit, so she was barely sweating. Her long dark hair was in a bun and she wore a pair of large sunglasses to protect her eyes from the harsh sun. I wished that I had brought sunglasses with me. "Okay, we actually made good time getting here. I was thinking that we could each do a tiny intro and say our names," Jeremiah explained as he dug around in the pack looking for snacks. He pulled out his own bottle of water and a pack of granola. Ashton glared at Jeremiah. "Do we have to tell the viewer a cool fact about ourselves too?" Jeremiah laughed and opened his snack, taking a few bites before answering Ashton. "Nah man, just say your name. I was thinking if the web series takes off we could each do our own biography videos or something. But that will be in the future." That seemed to appease Ashton and he turned his attention towards me. "Are you okay with being on camera, Penny? I know you really don't like having your picture taken." I nodded and gave him a reassuring smile. "I'll be okay. It's a stupid phobia anyway. I can handle smiling for the camera, it won't kill me." Rosa had walked up behind me and gave me a playful pat on my shoulder as she took her own seat in the shade. "That's good. Usually it's like pulling teeth to get you to pose for a selfie with me," she said, giving me a pouting grin before she retrieved her own water from the pack. "Well," I said, starting to feel self-conscious, "it's time I got over it. Especially if I'm going to be in a web series." Rosa grinned at me and took off her sunglasses, winking at me as she sat next to Jeremiah. "Why did you even bring a camera, Jeremiah? We all have phones, we could each just film with them." Rosa nudged him playfully as she stared at the camera in his lap. "I have a camera because all good filmmakers need a camera, you can't always rely on phones, and besides," he added grinning, "it was on sale." Seeing all my friends snacking and drinking water was enough to make me realize I was getting hungry too. It was a good idea to stay hydrated anyway. I grabbed my own water bottle and some chips. I downed half the bottle before tearing open the chip bag. I had been thirstier than I thought, so Here's the game plan, Jeremiah started to explain in between bites of granola. After our little coffee break I'll do the initial backstory intro, then you guys introduce yourselves, then we film ourselves walking into the tunnel. Sounds good, man, Ashton said with a full mouth. He had started on his second bag of chips while Rosa was daintily eating a protein bar. Jeremiah clapped his hands together, ridding them of granola crumbs before picking up his camera again. Well, let's get this ghost party started. Jeremiah stood up and walked back out into the sun, holding the camera in front of his face as he began filming. It's not really a ghost party though, is it, Penny? I mean, there was never any proof that the tunnel was haunted, Rosa questioned me. I shook my head. It's really never been confirmed that it's haunted. There were never any deaths from the construction of the tunnel. What it's really known for is the disappearances. Except for Jeremiah, I was the one who knew the most about the tunnel. I had helped him in his research online. And when the internet stopped yielding results, it was me who pored over old books and microfiche in the library. Ashton snorted. It's not like they can actually confirm some place is haunted, can they? It's hard to confirm something that doesn't exist. Rosa gave him a questioning look. If you don't believe in this stuff, then why are you helping Jeremiah? Ashton shrugged, because it's something to do. Besides, if he gets YouTube famous filming places like this, it'll be easy money. I'm not sure if I'm going to make it to college like you guys. I shook my head. You can go to college, Ashton, you're just as smart as the rest of us. He looked at me and gave me a resigned look. He opened his mouth to say something, but Jeremiah yelled over to us, "Guys, cut the chit-chat, I gotta film." He sounded exasperated with us. We stopped talking and looked over to him. Rosa rolled her eyes at him and Ashton made an exaggerated lip-zipping motion with his hand at Jeremiah. "Thank you." Jeremiah yelled back at us sarcastically before turning back to the camera. Grinning into the camera, Jeremiah began his introduction. "Hello my ghouls. Welcome to the Midwest Occult Online. Hosted by me, your boy Jeremiah." He smiled broadly at the camera as he droned on with his introduction. To his own ears I'm sure he thought he sounded confident. To me he sounded like a car salesman trying to sell me a used Toyota. The Carter Tunnel was completed in 1933, smack dab in the middle of the Great Depression. Because people were in need of some good and reliable work, there was no shortage of laborers eager to earn a wage. Jeremiah held up a photocopy of an article from the local newspaper. It featured a large black and white photo of the half-finished tunnel in the background. In the foreground was the eponymous Mr. Carter, for whom the tunnel had been named. He had a rather impressive mustache, and he looked sternly out of the photograph while decked out in the height of 1930s businessman fashion. The Carter Tunnel was named after Mr. Edward Carter III. He was the mayor at the time, and one of the richest men in the county. He had been the one to convince the railway to build here. Because of that he was highly regarded by the citizens. Jeremiah dropped the page and pulled forth another one from his pocket, also featuring the former mayor. This one was of him cutting a ribbon in the front of the tunnel. Other men, similarly dressed, were beside him and all of them smiled for the camera. During the construction of the tunnel many men complained that something was making them sick. There are widespread reports of nausea or dizziness spreading among the men. Because of this there was a high turnover rate. Some of the older workers couldn't handle the sickness that was seemingly spreading around. It was only after the completion of the tunnel that the disappearances started to happen. Jeremiah licked his lips before continuing. He seemed to really be getting in the tale. Even from several feet away I could see his eyes glinting with excitement. The first man to disappear was a young man named Edgar Cooper Smith. He had been one of the original workers on the tunnel. His co-workers reported that they saw him enter the tunnel, but never leave. He was not reported missing until after he had been gone for a full week. Even then, his disappearance was attributed to just running off. Jeremiah swallowed before continuing. There were other disappearances, of course. Several teenage boys were reported as missing. But they were labeled as runaways and no one had the resources to really look for them. Jeremiah pulled out another newspaper clipping, photocopied from old microfiche. This one prominently featured an older woman, wearing a lavish outfit and staring out from the black and white page. It wasn't until a Mrs. Margaret Wright disappeared right off a train that people began to speculate that something sinister was happening in the tunnel. Mrs. Wright had been a wealthy widow until the recession hit. She had sold all of her earthly belongings and was traveling to a nearby town to live with her son and daughter-in-law. Eyewitness accounts say that she had been seated next to the window, talking to her fellow passengers. She was there when the train went into the tunnel, but afterwards she was gone. No one could explain how a fully grown woman could disappear off a moving train in 30 seconds. As he talked, Rosa looked enraptured. I could tell that she was into the whole story. Ashton wasn't paying attention at all, and was drinking another bottle of water. The story intrigued me, but I wasn't sure if I could really believe that a tunnel was actively causing people to disappear. Though I could admit that it was exceptionally creepy, there were other disappearances after Mrs. Wright, and they seemed to increase in frequency. Jeremiah held up more photos and let them drop away, revealing the portraits of all the missing. There were over a dozen different accounts of people vanishing from the trains after they passed through the tunnel. Men, women, and 2 children were simply gone. The pattern was erratic too. Sometimes days or weeks would go by without a disappearance. Sometimes they would occur just a day apart. The railroad company tried to keep everything hush-hush, but the final nail on the coffin happened in 1934. The train's conductor became a victim of the tunnel. He vanished from his post, right in front of the train engineer. The train very nearly derailed before the engineer was able to apply the brakes. He forced everyone to evacuate the train and walk to the nearby station, which was over 5 miles away. After that, the railway company closed down the tunnel after only 1 year of use. It has been inactive ever since. Turning off the camera, he sauntered back over to join us in the shade. He was smiling and he seemed pretty pleased with himself. Not too bad, right? I told you guys this place had a creepy backstory to it. Rosa stared at him wide-eyed. So what do you think happened to those people? Could they have just run away? Ashton snorted. It's kind of hard to run off of a moving train. I bet they were suicides. It was the Great Depression, people were depressed. They probably just jumped off the train. Rosa rolled her eyes at him. Yeah, maybe, but then what happened to their bodies? They couldn't make their own bodies vanish. Ashton smirked at her. Coyotes. The bodies were eaten by really big coyotes. Jeremiah barked out a laugh, and Rosa swatted at his arm. It's not funny. The thought of being eaten by a coyote is kind of morbid. She shivered despite the heat. This whole place is kind of morbid though. It was almost 100 years ago. I don't think that we'll ever know what happened to those people. I piped in. Jeremiah shrugged and held up the camera. Let's do our quick intros and then we will walk the tunnel. I wanna get lunch after this. Ashton drank the rest of his water and, after depositing the used container in the pack, gave Jeremiah a thumbs up. I'll go first. Jeremiah held of the camera and waved at him to continue. Ashton waved at the camera and gave a tiny smile. Hey, I'm Ashton and here to help Jeremiah find something crazy tonight for you folks. Jeremiah gave a thumbs up and turned off the camera. That was pretty good, though I'm not sure I've ever heard you say folks before. You should just speak like you normally do. Ashton shrugged and reached for another bag of chips. Next was Rosa's turn. She winked and posed in front of the camera. Hello everyone, I'm Rosa. I'm Jeremiah's girlfriend, partner in crime, and fellow ghost hunter. Jeremiah blew a kiss at her as she finished. Really great babe. The camera loves you. Next was me. I smiled as best I could and tried to look confident as I gave my intro. Hi, I'm Penny and I'm a ghost hunter too. I hope we find something really spooky for you guys tonight. I inwardly winced at my own voice. I sounded far less confident than I meant to, but Jeremiah gave me a thumbs up and a smile and I figured that what I had said was good enough. Well, I think that'll do it, Jeremiah said as he turned off the camera. Are we ready to get going? Rosa stood up and dusted herself off. Since you'll be filming with that tiny camera you got, I was thinking that Penny and I could film using our phones. It can't hurt to have some POV from our perspectives. Jeremiah shrugged in answer. It can't hurt, besides maybe you'll capture something interesting. You can film my voluptuous backside with your camera." Ashton batted his eyes at Rosa. Rosa rolled her eyes at him but didn't say anything. She walked past Ashton and motioned for me to join her. I followed along as she walked to the tunnel entrance. As we walked closer and closer to the entrance, I started to feel really anxious, almost like I was experiencing the beginning of a panic attack. Standing in front of the mouth of the tunnel, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I wasn't sure where it was coming from. My heart started to race and I felt lightheaded. It was sudden and severe enough that it doubled me over. I placed my hand on my knees and took a few breaths to steady myself. Bile was rising in my throat and I breathed steadily through my nose to keep myself from vomiting up my snack. Ashton walked up beside me and grabbed hold of my upper arm. I guess he thought I was about to pass out. "Penny, are you okay? You look like you're about to puke or something." He sounded concerned. "I'm okay," I said, straightening back up. "I just felt sick for a minute there. Do you think you could have some mild heart stroke? How much water have you had today anyway?" Rosa asked as she came up beside me. She reached out to feel my forehead. She frowned as she touched my skin. "You're not warm but you do feel clammy. Here, take the rest of my water." She held her half-full water bottle out to me. "If you do have heat stroke you need to keep hydrated." I shook my head but Rosa fixed me with a glare that let me know she was not asking me, she was telling me. I drank the last few gulps of water to make her happy. It did make me feel a bit better actually. Maybe I just had too much sun today. "Are you guys ready to do this or what?" Jeremiah beamed at us as he finally joined us at the entrance. He had already started filming. "Is everything okay?" he asked me, his smile faltering as he saw the look on my face. "She might have mild heat stroke, Jeremiah. She got nauseous just now. Maybe it's not such a good idea to do this. We should get Penny somewhere with some air conditioning." Rosa spoke for me, her eyes looking from me to Jeremiah. "So you got sick to your stomach, huh?" Jeremiah smiled at me. "Maybe you're getting some psychic impressions from the tunnel. Maybe it's warning you to stay away." From his tone of voice, I couldn't tell if he was joking or not. "You're not funny, man. Heat stroke is a serious thing." "At least I think it is," Ashton chimed in. I waved my hands to get everyone's attention. "I'm feeling much better, really. I think I'll be okay once we get in the tunnel. It's nice and cool in there and it'll get me out of the sun." Rosa looked at me skeptically. She didn't believe me at all, but Jeremiah seemed convinced. "I bet it's just nerves, Penny. We will be in and out of this tunnel in 5 minutes. Then we come back this way, hop in the car, and it'll be time for some victory tacos." Jeremiah reassured me. Rosa sighed. "Okay, but if Penny gets sick we leave immediately, okay? This stupid tunnel will still be here tomorrow." Jeremiah nodded his head in exasperated agreement. "Fine. If Penny gets sick we will come back tomorrow. Now let's get walking." With no further ceremony Jeremiah walked into the darkness. The illumination from the camera was all he had to guide himself. "Wait up, man. I got the only flashlight," Ashton called out. He huffed after him, lightly jogging to keep up with his friend. Rosa and I shrugged at each other and took up the rear of the procession. We opened our phones, hitting record. If there was anything supernatural in the tunnel, multiple recordings might pick up what our eyes could not. My nausea, which had abated slightly, came back full force. I was swallowing hard and breathing through my nose in steady breaths. The air in here smelled old and dead. Like opening up an old trunk of clothes and smelling the dust and decay. There was a damp moldy smell too that reminded me of wet dogs. I sped up. If we walked faster we could reach the end and then be done with this place. Rosa tapped me lightly on the shoulder. "Are you still doing okay, Penny?" she whispered in the dark. I couldn't see her at all. The black of the tunnel was all-encompassing. "I'm fine," I wheezed back at her. "I just want to get out of this stinking place." Rosa let out a soft laugh. "You and me both. This place is creepy inside." We kept walking. Ahead of us Jeremiah talked into the camera and filmed. Occasionally Ashton would chip into the conversation. Their voices echoed in the empty space but I wasn't paying attention to what they were saying. Rosa remained silent. I didn't speak because I didn't trust myself to open my mouth. Suddenly I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. We must have just passed the bend, which meant we were almost out. I didn't want to be in here any longer and I took off at a sprint, passing the guys in my dash to the entrance. Hey there Penny, slow down. Where's the fire, huh? We're almost out anyway. Jeremiah called out to me as I breezed past him. Running out into the sun almost felt like being born. The heat and the sun hit me full force. It was almost refreshing after the moldy damp. I took a deep breath of the hot summer air, then promptly doubled over and vomited onto the gravel. The guys came out of the darkness laughing. When they saw me puking they hurried over, and Ashton placed his hand on my back. Penny, I'm sorry, we shouldn't have gone in there. You really are sick. He patted my back in an effort to comfort me. Once I was able to stand back up I looked back at Jeremiah. He was grinning while still filming me. Did you really just film me vomit up some chips, Jeremiah? That's really sick. I tried my best to glare at him, but after emptying my stomach I felt suddenly weak. My glare probably didn't look that intimidating. I'm sorry, he said, turning off his camera. He didn't look sorry at all. I promise not to put that in the final cut of the video. Wow, Jeremiah, you're such a prince, Ashton sneered at him. He must have been fed with his attitude just as much as I was. Where's Rosa? Jeremiah asked suddenly. He looked around then back towards the tunnel. She was right beside you, wasn't she, Penny? I nodded. I hadn't realized that she hadn't joined us yet. She was right behind me, I said weakly. Staring back at the entrance I waited expectantly to see her walk out of the shadows. But there was nothing. Jeremiah walked back to the entrance, cupped his hands around his mouth, and shouted Rosa. The only thing we heard was the echo from his shout reverberating back to us. Maybe she already turned around and went back the other way. Maybe she wanted to beat us to the car? Ashton sounded unsure, but it made the most sense. Jeremiah nodded but didn't look convinced. Yeah, let's head back to the front and meet her there. Our walk back felt shorter, and we stayed together walking side by side. I kept my hand on Ashton's shoulder as we walked to stay steady on my feet. I was feeling pretty lightheaded. When we came back out into the light there was still no sign of Rosa. Jeremiah had a look of panic on his face now. He wasn't even bothering to film anymore. We walked around, looking behind the bushes and the trees for Rosa. She wasn't there. Unless she was intentionally hiding from us, we would have seen her. Okay. We need to go back through the tunnel. Maybe she fell in a hole or something. If we don't find her, then we need to call the police. Jeremiah was running his hands through his hair in a nervous gesture. She's gotta be somewhere close by, he added before turning to stare into the tunnel. I dialed Rosa's cell phone, hoping that maybe she would answer. It rang then went to voicemail. The fact that she wasn't picking up her phone was serious. Rosa would never intentionally ignore me. And she was absolutely not the kind of person to pull a practical joke. So we went back into the tunnel. Ashton shined his flashlight into every nook and cranny. We checked the ground for holes that she might have fallen in. Jeremiah and I used our cell phones for added illumination. We looked for her as best we could, but we had to face the facts. Rosa wasn't in the tunnel anymore. We called the police. Jeremiah was hysterical by that point. He was calling out for Rosa, screaming her name, but it was no use. The police were much more organized than we were. They set up a perimeter and a search party was organized. We were a smaller town, so someone going missing was big news. Dozens of volunteers turned up with flashlights to help search for Rosa. They combed the tunnel, going back and forth, yelling her name over and over till the echoes mixed together and were incomprehensible. The surrounding area was searched as well. The only trace of Rosa they found was her cell phone. It was still in the tunnel where we had lost her. People started gossiping. Rumors swirled around the disappearance. Some said it was a curse, come back to claim more lives. Others said it was the work of a serial killer, abducting people and killing them. Still others believed that Jeremiah, Ashton, and I had done something to Rosa. Ultimately we were exonerated. It was the footage from Jeremiah's camera and the recordings from our own phones that proved our innocence. The footage retrieved from Rosa's phone is what saved us. Her phone showed the three of us walking ahead of her, Then suddenly her camera dropped to the ground. It even went on to record the sounds of our voices as we searched for her. It was as if she had simply dropped her phone and walked away. After this evidence was found, she was labeled as a runaway. Rosa's parents never believed us when we protested our ignorance of Rosa's whereabouts. Rosa's father had followed me one day as I was in town running errands. He confronted me as I got out of my car, demanding to know what I had done with his daughter. When I kept protesting my innocence, he punched me straight in the face, hard enough to slam me back against the car and give me a bloody nose. A passerby came to me defense and drove him off. The police were called and my parents begged me to press charges against him. Ultimately I decided not to. I felt bad for him and I couldn't fault him for his desperation. Ashton couldn't handle all of the gossip and attention that we were getting. He decided to go live with his dad for a while in another state. His social media was deleted and I think he blocked us on his phone. All attempts Jeremiah and I made to contact him were ignored. Jeremiah handled it the worst of any of us. I couldn't blame him. Rosa was his girlfriend and he had loved her more than the rest of us. One day I got a text message from Jeremiah. "I'm going to find Rosa," was all it said. I tried to message him back but they went unread and unanswered. When my messages were ignored I tried calling but it went straight to voicemail. Jeremiah's parents called the police when he didn't come home that night, and he was quickly labeled a missing person. The police found his car by the old tunnel, abandoned with no sign of my friend. His car keys, wallet, and phone were all left on the car seat. It's been several weeks since he's gone missing. I don't think that they'll ever find him. Wherever that darkness in the tunnel eventually leads, it never lets anyone come home.